drop it. All right, power panel, obviously. Brooke Thomas, Ashlee Marie Preston's back. Hey.
Thanks for having me.
Always glad to have you here.
All right. So big show ahead. Lots of Trump madness, of course, but also some shade at Democrats. Well deserved. Also shade at the New York Times again. Look, we don't have an agenda. It's just they keep doing things that are super questionable. So in this case, it's their deputy managing editor in Washington. So and whether he thinks black people are really from the Midwest or really from the South, et cetera,
or really black. I don't know. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. So lots to get to on the show, and unfortunately, we're going to start with El Paso, and unfortunately, we're going to start with Donald Trump again. So Brooke, take it away.
All right. Yeah, many people are upset at a picture Melania Trump posted on Twitter, and I want you to see the picture because. In the picture, you see the Trumps, Melania and the president smiling. Trump has his thumbs up, and Melania is actually holding the baby whose parents were shot and killed by the El Paso Walmart shooter this past weekend. So it's a happy photo for such an unhappy experience.
Yeah.
And so people are upset about it, calling it inappropriate. Also, the president did not meet any of the 8 survivors still recovering in the hospital. We learned 3 were unable because they were in too poor a condition or don't speak English, and that's according to the hospital. 5 declined the offer. What we also learned is a hospital spokesperson told BuzzFeed News that baby in that photo was actually brought back to the hospital specifically for that Trump visit and photo op. Doctors there also told reporters Trump showed what they called a complete lack of empathy, and that he spent a lot of time talking about Beto O'Rourke. Take a look.
The job you've done, and they're talking about it all over the world, and it's an honor to be with you. Look at this group of people. Can you believe this? Good looking people.
They're fantastic.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had what was the name of the arena? That place was packed, right?
I was front row.
Right? The judges have respected
I was front row.
What was the name?
I was front row there.
Oh, good. Come here, man. That was some crowd.
Thank you for
And we had twice the number
Thank you.
outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
Look at me.
But we had some.
Look at that.
Whoa, oh wow, look at that. Look at that, Judge. You see that?
I was encouraging her.
Don't tell it to the press because they won't even believe it.
No.
They only believe it on voting on the day of the vote. They say, what happened?
Okay, so here's the thing. We don't know why the 5 people in the hospital declined to see the president. It could just be because they were recovering from gunshot wounds. So I get that, but there were a lot of people, including politicians, a lot of people living in El Paso who did not want Trump to visit their city after this tragedy. And we caught up with one family, very open and clear about wanting to explain why.
I wish he wouldn't have needed to come. I think he just came to do a circus. He was the one who brewed up all this hatred against Mexicans. I guess he forgot what he said about El Pasoans, but he still came over here and do his circus because he wanted, what, votes? We didn't need them.
Yeah, and I have more video I can show you in a bit, but I wanna, I can tell you.
So first of all, on the visit, I don't have the standard position on this. I think as the president, you should go down there.
Yeah.
And yeah, he stirred up the hatred. That's definitely true. But look, going down there could be part of the healing. And it's also not his fault that the people didn't want to see him. So it is what it is. If I was shot because he stirred up the hatred, I wouldn't want to see him either. But you can't put that on him because it's not like he didn't want to see them. They didn't want to see him. Okay, so those are the things to be fair to Donald Trump. Now, let's go to the photo op situation. So the baby's not in the hospital. They bring him back for a photo op. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. No question, okay? So I'm gonna tell you the story about the baby and I'm gonna try not to tear up. And I wanna tell you guys, again, to be fair to Trump, that the uncle that is standing next to him is a Trump supporter. The baby's deceased father was a Trump supporter, okay? So it's not partisan in that sense. The baby's got broken fingers because his mom.
Oh gosh.
his mom fell on him to protect him, and while she was dying, and the dad took bullets for the mom falling on her to try to make sure that they weren't shot, and they were both killed protecting that baby. And the guy who killed him said it was because it was a Hispanic invasion and he wanted to go kill Latinos. Now, there's another guy who talks about Hispanic invasions all the time. His name is Donald Trump. So I'm not gonna get into a debate with idiot right-wingers of like, oh no, it's just a coincidence. I don't care what you think, honestly. It's obviously not a coincidence. So, okay, all that is we know, and he said, his staff said, oh, we didn't allow reporters into the hospital because we didn't want a photo op. Well, then why'd you bring the baby back and take a picture with the baby? That's literally a photo op. And then why did you put a campaign ad out with a video of you visiting the hospitals? That's a photo op. And then apparently he yelled at his own staff saying, why didn't you let the reporters in? This looks great for me. He's such a monster. But finally, to get to the most critical part of this, what kind of a sociopath puts a thumbs up and smiles with a picture of a baby who lost both their parents, both his parents, and they died protecting him because of a guy who was, but you know what, look guys, give Trump every benefit of the doubt. Assume he doesn't know how the parents died. He knows it's obviously in the shooting, but doesn't know the details. Assume that, hey, again, like I said, that some of the relatives are Trump supporters, etc. Why are you putting your thumbs up? Why are you smiling? What kind of a sociopath does that? Even if you gave him the benefit of the doubt and said he didn't have anything to do with the shooting, if somebody says to me, here's a baby, his parents just died, the very last thing I do is this, okay? And I hope none of you would do that, because you're a normal person. And even no matter what your political opinions are, and no matter whether you were related to the shooting, not related to cause that didn't cause it, put all that aside, although you shouldn't. It's 1,000 times worse that he had some culpability in the shooting, and then, oh, your parents are dead, right? Hey, I got a good photo op out of this. Did I gain politically? And that's why the video that Brooke showed you is so important. Oh, Beto's crowd was small, my crowd was big. God damn it, it's not supposed to be about you. He can't be president for a second. And you know that if you were, I can't imagine, even if you're MAGA, etc., somebody gives you a baby and says his parents died, that you're beaming and like, yes, this is good for me, you do this. No, you know who does that? A sociopath. A sociopath does that because he cannot, I think he physically, literally cannot empathize with other human beings. He just does not have the ability to understand the context or care. And so he does this. And you can say, hey, it's too much about one picture, but I've seen him do it 1,000 times, 1,000 times. Cannot relate to the other person at all. And also, just too unintelligent to understand the context of where he is. Any person that is above a moron grade would think, hey, this is not the time to be beaming. I'm supposed to be showing empathy to the people who are hurt in the hospital. My God, this baby, my God, this baby. How does it not break your heart? How does it not break your heart? If you don't have one in the first place, that's how it doesn't break it. But even so, a Richard Nixon type of person would have at least known to do the optics of mourning, optics of empathy, but he's too stupid to know that too. So I have to keep my own sanity. I have to assume that Trump supporters don't know any of these details. Because if I think you know it and you still support him, it's too depressing a sign for humanity.
I think the other piece too is that we underestimate Trump's narcissistic personality disorder. The first thing that I noticed from the photo that was posted was the step and repeat in the backdrop.
Oh yeah.
That was the most wildly inappropriate thing. And I think it speaks to Trump's idea that this is just an extension of his reality show. The United States government, his presidency, his appearances, it is all to boost ratings for himself, not only as a president, but from what he understands is still a competent businessman. And so I think the thing that broke my heart the most was the fact that he smiled and he held the thumbs up, and the fact that that baby is there because of Trump's protection of the NRA and the administration's refusal to make decisions that are in the best interest of the American people. I think more than anything, it couldn't have gotten worse. The thing that would have probably made it worse is if they would have brought in the shooter to to jump in the photo op. Like, there was no reason to do that. But I think Trump, he just reminds me of this used car salesman. He, like, even when he speaks, I don't know if anyone noticed, even when he went to El Paso the first time, and then he went to, he was mentioned in Dayton, and he talks about these tragedies as if he's given a Yelp review. Like, yeah, the first responders, good people, I liked it, good turnout, great people, I liked, he.
I didn't think I could laugh about this, but Ashlee Marie, you did it. The Yelp review.
It's a Yelp review.
Yeah, it's a perfect description.
Fine folks, good people. I was satisfied. They threw in the bread basket for free. Like, he's out of his mind.
Yeah, and the band marched on.
Yeah. Should we move on?
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, there's what else can you say, right?
Yeah, look, when I first saw the picture, I didn't even want to do the story. I was so discouraged. Like, I can't. Nothing triggers me more than people who cannot empathize with other human beings.
Yeah.
Well, it should also speak to the GOP as well, because there's this idea that, oh, it's liberals, it's like us, it's them. But these are actually people from your base who were negatively impacted by policies and decisions that the current administration passed down. And so I think I'm hoping that people start to open their eyes and realize that they're just a piece on the checkerboard, that he doesn't have their best interest in mind, and that he will say whatever he needs to say to not only maintain power, but to continue to advance opportunities for his cronies in the White House.
That's true.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to our next story. Because we're actually learning even more about the situation at the chicken processing plants in Mississippi, where 700 workers were detained by ICE. Last year, Koch Foods settled a $3.75 million lawsuit for racial discrimination, national origin discrimination, and sexual harassment against its Latinx workers in that very same Morton, Mississippi facility. And I want to show you a little bit of what was alleged in the lawsuit, okay? Supervisors touched and or made sexually suggestive comments to female Hispanic employees, hit Hispanic employees, and charged many of them money for normal everyday work activities. Many workers were reportedly either discharged or subjected to other forms of retaliation when they complained. Now, this suit was brought forward by the EEOC. And as part of the settlement, Koch Foods not only paid out a massive sum to the victims, but also agreed to implement training for employees and set up a 24-hour hotline for reporting discrimination complaints in both English and Spanish. The settlement lasted 3 years, and that means Koch Foods is still under supervision to continue efforts to reduce discrimination in its workplace. And a lot of people, including the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, they are worried that these ICE raids after this settlement will discourage workers from reporting abuses and unsafe work conditions. As labor reporter Mike Elk notes at Payday Report, it may not be a coincidence that the Morton plant was raided. There have been at least 2 other plants, one in Salem, Ohio, and another in Morristown, Tennessee, where ICE raids have followed complaints of worker conditions. Last year, for example, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, fined Freshmark more than $200,000 for 3 separate incidents in which proper safety guards were not in place in its Salem meatpacking plant. A week later, it was raided by ICE.
Definitely not a coincidence.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen 3 times in a row and it's a coincidence, no way. So there are 2 possible explanations. I'm actually hoping that it's the one that is less terrible. So the one that would be most terrible is they're like, oh, people want to complain about workplace harassment, let's go round them all up. I actually don't think that that's the one. I don't know, maybe I'm not, after all this, I might still be naive and there might be terrible people in the Trump administration who think, it's a twofer, we round up undocumented immigrants. And hey, if you complain about sexual harassment that our boss does or we all do or whatever, we're gonna round you up. But I think that's less likely. I think the more likely thing is it's just easy and they're lazy. So they're like, oh, we just did that case with the undocumented immigrants and they were being sexually harassed or they had unsafe work conditions, et cetera. Well, we know they're undocumented immigrants, so we'll call ICE and it's easy. Then they don't have to bother doing research and figuring out who has undocumented immigrants because we already know. And there might also be a directive within the Trump administration. If any government department knows of undocumented immigrants, they must turn it over to ICE. So that's the more likely scenario, but think about how terrible that is anyway. Because that means if you go to seek help from law enforcement in any way, shape, or form that reaches the federal government, they're gonna turn on you and they're gonna ruin your lives.
So the system is already set up in a bad way.
Yeah. So there's two components of that. One is, well, Jesus, these people came to you for help and then you buried them, right? So thanks a lot, we really appreciate it. But the second part is actually even worse, because now the word on the street is going to be, after seeing these raids over and over again, don't ever complain. If you're getting sexually harassed, assaulted, whatever it might be, unsafe work conditions, suck it up, because if you complain to the Trump government, they're gonna deport you and they're gonna ruin your family's life. And so and then the third part of how bad that is that then the employers start to realize that and think, we've got free reign. We can do anything we want to these workers and they can't ever complain, because if they do, they get deported. So now God help these workers.
Right.
I think the most tragic part of this story was that it was the first day of school in Morton. So could you imagine the level of trauma and PTSD that these children are going to experience for the rest of their lives, going to school, wondering if something terrible is happening to their parents or their loved ones while they're there? And that's if they're actually reunified with their families. The other piece of that is that, let's talk about the economy, right? So the cost of these ICE raids, like they said that—
They worked on this for a year.
Yeah, and that it was, they brought 600 ICE agents to arrest almost 700 people or detain them. So we're not talking about the flights and the travel and the actual operation, but the fact that it cost almost $200 a day per person that they detain. It ends up, I saw another article that said it ends up being $3 million a month, and it ends up being $36 million a year. And we're talking about the numbers for this specific group. What does that do to the actual economy? We're not talking about every other state. We're talking about just this isolated raid. And then when you look at the president of the United States, he would have us believe that migrant workers and asylum seekers are criminals, rapists, drug dealers, they're violent people. But in reality, his own administration said there's an estimated 11 million undocumented people, but yet they bring in 11 billion, but they bring in $12 billion in tax revenue.
I want to show you guys, because I have another note about something you said. You brought up the children, and we talked about them yesterday. So a spokesman for Child Protective Services actually told the Washington Post that, look, we have resources here on the ground. We could have helped with this. There were kids sleeping in, gyms, kids not having anywhere to go after school. We could have helped with this, and saying that they were not contacted before or even after the fact. And here we are 2 days after the fact, and Child Protective Services still weren't contacted by the government in order to help with this, with the situation. Like, at this point, you realize that there are gonna be a lot of kids displaced. And also, we had a little girl on the show yesterday. She's 11 years old, and JR found even more of her begging for her father's release. And I wanna show it because she's 11, and this little girl is so strong. And I think that the level of strength that you can tell that she has, that has to go to show how she's being raised by these people that are being called monsters over and over again. So take a look.
My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal or something. That's what the immigrants took them. Please let him free. I want my dad to be free and everybody else. And those children are crying because of their dad and mom. I don't want my dad. No, the Hispanic people are not doing nothing bad. They're not stealing nothing. The immigrants just went just inside the company, just get our dads out of there. That's not fair, immigrants. Yeah, just see what I'm doing. I'm crying because of my dad. I have a lot of heart to my dad. A lot of children are crying, and their wife and their husbands are left because the immigrants took them. I can't do nothing but please open the door for the parents.
So she's saying immigrants in place of ICE. She's 11.
Yeah, of course. So
I've seen that 10 times.
But you know what though? I have to, I'm sorry, I get, this is really tragic, but let's just keep it real. we're talking about, again, going back to sociopaths, they're not motivated or inspired by frothy emotional appeal. Even when you look at conservatives, fiscal conservatives, the first thing they say is it's just about economic stability and safety. Yeah. And so the thing is, if the only thing that is standing in the way as an impediment to developing better policies for immigration and asylum seekers is the fiscal aspect, why aren't we talking numbers? And I think that, let's keep it real, it's not just the Trump administration that feels this way about immigrants and asylum seekers. It is people in the Democratic Party who have also said that they are a strain on our economy. We are having a hard time figuring things out for ourselves and our families and our benefits and our needs. So immigrants and asylum seekers are undocumented people. They're taking away from our American dream. And that couldn't be the farthest thing from the truth. So when we present these numbers, such as the fact that the state, local, federal tax ends up being $12 billion of a community that's only $11 billion, it's important to really underscore that when we're having these conversations, especially in the policy development stage.
So let me build off that, because I'm so tired of Democrats being incompetent on this issue. So the undocumented immigrants, as Ashlee Murray pointed out, pay more in taxes than they get out of the system. So for God's sake, say it. Say it every time. Not only that, hold the press accountable. Say that every time a Republican says that they're taking from us, call them a liar, because that's what they're doing. They're lying, or they're mistaken. They're fools. They're idiots. And show them the numbers. Do you know the numbers? If you're in the press, you don't know the numbers, do you? Then do your goddamn job. And then in terms of crime, they keep saying that they're more likely to be criminals. So that's just not true. It's not factual. They commit crime, undocumented immigrants commit crime at half the rate of native-born Americans. So it's not true. If you say it, you're either a fool or a liar. Press, are you ever going to do your job? Democratic Party, are you ever going to do your job against the monsters in the right wing who constantly put out this massive propaganda filled with complete and utter lies?
And follow the money too. The fact of the matter is that they are monetizing the immigration system, system, ICE, all of this, these privatized detention centers. There's money in it. So people hear like, wow, $36 million a year just for this small group. And there's millions more where that came from. And it's only going to continue to grow the more we continue ordering these raids. It's going to then increase the need for private detention centers, which is going to be an opportunity to make money.
Oh, of course, and then they donate back to the Republican politicians and they get money and that circle of corruption continues. Look, it's our job to be fair and bring the facts. So in the case of ICE, they did do a couple of things right here in the midst of the horrors of the overall operation. They let half the folks go so they could take care of the kids. They gave them phones so they can call and have the kids picked up. They didn't let Child Protective Services know, but they did let the school know after the raid. The reason they didn't let anybody know before the raid was because of Donald Trump. What? Well, it turns out because he's such an idiot that if you let the White House know that you're about to do a raid, the moron tweets about it. And so he's ruined a couple of raids, thank God, accidentally. So they stopped telling anyone, including the White House, because they're like, he's too stupid to keep a secret. He'll just blabber away on Twitter. And we spent a year on this operation, so we're not gonna tell the White House. They did take some of those precautions, but at the schools, a lot of the kids didn't show up today. Not just the ones from the parents, but also other folks' kids didn't show up because they're scared to death. And the schools say, no, it's okay, we're a safe haven. I love you, but you're not. There is no safe haven. It's the Trump years. You think they won't?
We're still in this country.
You think they won't ambush a school? ICE won't ambush a school? Of course they will.
Especially when you have like Betsy DeVos like at the head of like the Department of Education, and it's just like there is no safe space here.
There have been people arrested and detained while dropping their kids off at school. We've seen that story. Oh, that started happening really soon after Trump became president.
Yeah, just to be clear, they wouldn't be coming for the kids. I hope not.
Yeah.
But they do come after the parents picking up the kids. So that's why the kids don't go.
We saw the video where they busted out the car windows to get to the father, to the driver, while the kids were in the backseat with the mother. So like this stuff is not a game. I see on Twitter, people have been tweeting rights, know your rights. So if they come to your door, you have a right to ask this question, or you can say and do that. But now we're seeing agents quite literally assault those people they're trying to attain.
And last thing, guys, is that the story about how the federal government is targeting anyone that complained about workplace harassment and other issues, is why we have sanctuary cities. So if you're wondering, what does that mean? Why? Because the reason the sanctuary cities isn't to say, hey, we will take all the undocumented immigrants and we don't care, we're never gonna prosecute them for anything, including crimes. No. So of course that's right-wing propaganda. The reality is that they exist because they say, look, if there's a crime in our city, we want undocumented immigrants to report it, whether it's done to them, to a family member, or to someone else, or to be a witness. If we say we're gonna turn them into ICE if they cooperate with law enforcement, then no one will cooperate with law enforcement. It is to keep the city safer, and by the way, sanctuary cities, in other fact, have less crime than other parts of America. So, and the reason is because they cooperate with law enforcement. I know Trump's against cooperating with law enforcement in general, right? When it comes to his own business dealings, etc. But the reality is, if you make it a problem and a deterrent for people to work with the government, they will stop doing that completely, and then you have a real crime issue, and then you have real harassment issues, and you have all these issues. The sanctuary city idea is a logical one, not just for the protection of the immigrants, but for the protection of the whole city and the cops.
We should probably take a break.
Yes. All right. Now, after all of this, of course, Donald Trump, being this against undocumented immigrants, wouldn't have any of them working at his properties, would he? Now, you already know some of this answer, but new details from the Washington Post and as to whether he's still doing it and how much he did it. He's unreal. We'll give you those details when we come back. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. Cool news, Ron Perlman's gonna be here next week for Old School. So on
That's
Tuesday,
really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat, right? Me, Ben, and Ron are gonna do the Old School together. That's Tuesday, August 13th, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Members get to watch it live and they get to watch the whole show. So tyt.com/join. Hellboy meets Old School. Check it out. Okay, now I'm gonna go to your comments. Speaking of the members, Sylvia says, 2 beautiful ladies with fabulous hair. I like your haircut, Brooke. So.
Oh, it's gonna be shorter tomorrow. Long story, just see.
Long story short, hair.
Exactly.
Okay. So
Thank
Brooke
you.
says she likes compliments, and then it just rains in.
It
right?
does, yeah. It's
good marketing. I like it.
they're just people are just trying to make me happy. You know,
Yes,
I appreciate it.
Well deserved. Underscore says the president is suffering from mental deterioration. When are we allowed to say it in plain language? He was one of the stupidest people ever, and now he's suffering from a physical breakdown of his brain. The fact that he's dominating our entire culture right now is beyond obscene. Yeah. I agree with that because I saw a clip of his from the 1990s recently, and it was a long interview, and I watched a portion of it, and I thought, no, he's still dumb there, but he's not. He's conscious. He's not as broken down as he is now. Like now he's like childlike and doesn't speak in complete sentences, and everything makes no sense. Back then, you're like, oh, that's a functioning human being. It's a human being I don't like. It's a human being that's not that intelligent, but he's functioning.
And it may have been before Don the Con. Like it may have been at a time where he wasn't like backed into a corner and not finding himself making deals with foreign governments and things like that. So who knows?
Yeah. But I think there's definitely deterioration, but it's pop psychology. I'm not an expert on it. Okay, except I'm obviously right. All right, so Marijuana's #3 fan says, if both parents are arrested by the police for anything, Child Protective Services would have to be called and an officer would have to stay at the location until a social worker came. ICE are not officers, they are Trump's Gestapo and need to be abolished and every agent investigated. So there is standard protocol for Child Protective Services and they did not follow it. So that is important, absolutely right. Tim says, new member from Canada, thanks for everything TYT does. We appreciate what you're doing. We can't do the show without you guys, it's no joke, okay? So become a member, tyt.com/join if you're a member. If you wanna upgrade, that would be amazing, tyt.com/upgrade. If you like anything we're saying and you wanna do a donation, it definitely helps, tyt.com/yes. For that. Let me read one last one here because I think it's a really good point. Eclectic Miscellanea says, If you'd come out with a dystopian political novel 20 years ago and had Trump elected as president and doing everything that he's done, critics would have panned it because it's so sickeningly unreal that no one would have found it believable. Unfortunately, that's a devastatingly good point. No question, I know, I'm positive. 20 years ago, if I had predicted on the show that, hey, this is what's gonna happen, everybody would say, full-blown lunatic. There's Donald Trump, president. Are you insane? And then he does these Gestapo things, and he does all these things, and then he fires the baby of the murdered parents, and then goes like this, and they would be like, come on, Cenk.
Right.
How could you even imagine these things? What sick thoughts you have? That couldn't possibly be true. And here we are.
Right.
Here we are in the middle of idiot. What was it? Idiotopia. Yeah, the Idiocracy.
Oh.
Sorry, thank you.
Definitely one for the history.
It's an ironic title to get wrong, but anyway. All right, Brooke, what's next?
All right. For years, the Trump administration has relied on workers who entered the US illegally. And this is actually according to workers who say the practice is still going on today. President Trump doesn't want undocumented people in the country, said one worker, Jorge Castro, a 55-year-old immigrant from Ecuador without legal status, who left the company in April after 9 years. But at his property, Castro says he still has them. Now, Castro actually detailed his long experience with the company, saying he worked on 7 Trump properties, most recently Trump's golf club in Northern Virginia. He provided the Washington Post with several years of his pay stubs from Trump's construction company, Mobile Payroll Construction LLC, as well as photos of him and his colleagues on Trump courses and text messages he exchanged with his boss, including one in January, dispatching him, to Trump's New Jersey golf course. Another immigrant who worked for the Trump construction crew, Edmundo Morocho, said he was told by a Trump supervisor to buy fake identity documents on a New York street corner. He said he once hid in the woods of a Trump golf course to avoid being seen by visiting labor union officials. And just to take it back a bit, you will remember that in January, Eric Trump, of course, one of Donald Trump's sons and a top Trump organization executive, told the Post that the company was making a broad effort to identify any employee who was given false and fraudulent documents to unlawfully gain employment, saying any individuals would be immediately fired. So according to current and former employees, though, nothing has changed. The White House had no comment, but a spokeswoman, for the Trump organization did say Mobile Payroll Construction is enrolled in E-Verify for any new hires. The company is still not listed in the public E-Verify database, though, which was updated last month, July 1st.
Yeah, as usual, liars. No, there's a database.
Right.
We can check it. They're not in there. You know why? Because they still have undocumented immigrants.
Right.
They did a show of firing some of the undocumented immigrants that they've had, but they've had these for, according to the workers who've been there, some of whom are undocumented, 19 years. For 19 years, they've hired undocumented immigrants. They even asked Trump. Trump said, they asked him, are you guys still using undocumented immigrants? You would think that, especially for Trump, who lies all the time, that'd be like, no problem. Like, oh no, never. We never use them, or we certainly don't use them now. No, it's weird. He actually hesitated because he knows it's so true. And so he said, well, that I don't know because I don't run it. But I would say this, probably every club in the United States has that. Because it seems to me, from what I understand, the way that people did business. Well, they didn't ask about people, they asked about you, right? So that comment right there means, oh yeah, definitely, definitely. When Trump says, well, it could be, that means, oh, we're definitely doing it, and we're still doing it. And of course he knows, he talks to his kids all the time. To give you the depth of how much they did it, Sanzo was the guy who organized this group that they called, I mean, it was so well known that other employees of the Trump organization called them the Flintstones, because it was a group that worked on waterfalls and different construction projects, et cetera. They gave them a nickname. They're undocumented. They would know when to hide. They'd go into the woods to hide when labor unions came, et cetera. So the Washington Post reporter calls Sanzo, who headed the group, who is, I think, Italian and is a citizen, but he put the group together of undocumented immigrants. When they called him, he said, most of my guys were legal. Okay, and then he says, well, I don't know if they were legal or not. Okay, in other words, of course they weren't legal, of course. The guys who are undocumented said, yeah, Sanzo would tell us to go to Queens and pick up ID for $50. and then he'd say it was good enough. In fact, Sanzo said, they gave me a social and a license, I put them on the payroll. So brazen.
Right.
Never cared about the issue.
I think it's a thing. I first and foremost love that this witness brought all these receipts forward.
Yeah,
I
pay stubs.
love receipts.
Yeah.
I love receipts, especially toward an administration that creates their own facts. The other piece is that, my honest opinion, I don't think Trump actually has a problem with migrant workers or undocumented people. I think he pandered to a specific base who he riled them up, and now the villagers with the torches are like, who do we blame? And he snatched a page from Hitler's book of Mein Kampf, and we'll blame the undocumented people, the immigrants, the illegal immigrants. And so now he's having to walk back all of that energy he put into his campaign. But when it comes to how he does business and his own ethics and practices, I do not believe Trump cares one way or another as long as his bottom line dollar is increased.
So, okay, so I agree and slightly disagree, because I do believe that he is overwhelmingly racist. So I do believe that at all times, and I know you know so too, like he does not believe these people are as human as he is, or someone who looks like him. But of course, he would love to abuse them and pay them less, and be able to skirt under the bridge a little bit when it comes to taxes and any other money that has to come out of his pocket, out of his business. Sure, he'll exploit them.
But of course, racism, though, like slavery, there's no, it's one of those things, like they were racist, obviously, but the thing is that they still saw the economic opportunity. And to this day, we still see that they had hundreds of years of free labor. And we have some of these old companies still standing that are empires based on the labor. So I think that the real issue is that America really doesn't have a problem with migrant workers any more than they had a problem with black slaves. The issue is that when you start reaching for rights, benefits, and protections, then it becomes a problem.
Well, so I agree with both of you.
I think that I ended up agreeing with her.
I know. So, but I just want to explain, guys. So if you're trying to figure out how Trump works, there's the underlying racism, which are the stereotypes that are in his head. So, and they're like classic stereotypes. Puerto Ricans are lazy, that's why they didn't help themselves in the hurricane, right? And African Americans are violent, and and Latinos are criminals, and all these different underlying things. Oh, when he went to go speak to the Jewish Republicans, you guys like to renegotiate more than anybody else does.
But white man in mass shootings, it's just mental illness. They need
it's a lone wolf, of course. If it's a Muslim, he's part of a terrorist organization that's worldwide, that's connected to all Muslims. So that's the underlying infrastructure. But on a day by day, it's all about the money, right? You're a Hispanic immigrant, but I get to pay you less? Great deal, who cares? What do I care, right? Oh, you're a Saudi, and normally I would hate you, but you're paying me $40-50 million for a condo, then I like it. So that's fine, no problem.
Sure, you can murder the journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, it's fine, it's no big deal.
Of course, and that is separate from my other stereotypes, et cetera, because now money's involved, and that's my day-to-day interaction with you. So, and Ashlee, you're 100% right that he never really cared about this issue because he's been doing this for decades, hiring undocumented immigrants. Never thought that like he might have stereotypes about Latinos, but undocumented immigrants as workers didn't bother him at all, right? And so why? Why did he go down this path politically? Because he A/B tested the crowd. And so he would go in front of the crowd and I would see him early on in the campaigns. He would say one thing and see how the crowd reacted. And then he would say another thing and see how the crowd reacted. And remember, Trump, you've seen this with your own eyes for years now, will say two different things in a paragraph that are diametrically opposed, the complete opposite. It's part of his instinctual A/B testing. Because how do I get liked? How do I grab the spotlight, right? So, not that he literally did this, but probably got close in some of the speeches, and certainly he did it behind the scenes in talking to his advisors, other conservatives, Breitbart, Steve Bannon, et cetera.
But there were also people that were leading some of those studies. So I remember reading an article recently where journalists had identified specific plants in the audience who would start chanting something, and then they were actually identified as people who were hired by the administration. So they would lead these chants, send her back, all of these things to see how people reacted.
Right, but in the beginning, he tested his messages. So we like undocumented immigrants, boo. No, we hate undocumented immigrants, Okay, that's it. Then we're going with hate. We're hating undocumented immigrants. They're the worst. But Donald, you hire tons of them. Who cares? They like the message. Hypocrisy. It's like I was born in it, right? So last thing, guys. One of the workers, Maracho, said, "quote Nobody had papers." Okay, about his workers that worked on these different Trump properties. Nobody had papers, and I want, like, again, if we had a strong Democratic Party, everything could be different. Because in one of the raids last year, in the the Tennessee raid, they actually arrested the guy who runs the company. Because it's illegal to hire the undocumented immigrants. It's more illegal than the guys being undocumented in the first place, because you're hiring hundreds of them, right? Under that precedent and law, you would arrest Donald Trump. We know for a fact they turned over dozens of undocumented immigrants recently, saying, yeah, they work here and now we're firing them. So why aren't we arresting Trump? Look, I know they're not gonna arrest Trump, but Democrats, you wanna do a press conference? You wanna get up there and go, hey, Donald Trump has had undocumented immigrants working for him for years. He should be arrested. If you say he should be arrested, one, you would be technically correct, and two, it would create headlines and outrage. And then, you know what would happen then? Then everybody would be talking about what kind of a criminal Donald Trump is and what a giant hypocrite is. And as it stands, other than like people who read the Washington Post, New York Times, and watch the Young Turks, nobody else knows. You think your neighbor knows that Trump has been hiring undocumented immigrants for 2 decades? They don't know, because the goddamn Democrats can't open their mouths and fight back.
But the Sesame Street I word of the day, impeachment, it would actually lend to the impeachment case they're building. Because it's currently happening still. So we're not talking decades ago, we're talking today as we sit here, there are unethical practices and they're violating the very laws that they push forward.
And none of this is hard, they're just choosing not to do it.
All right, time.
All right, yeah, we got to take a break, guys. When we come back, speaking of the New York Times, they've done some good investigations and reports, of course. On the other hand, there's this deputy Washington editor. Wait till you get a load of this guy when we come back.